Hey everyone, it is Courtney and Devin here today with another episode of Eat Meat and Question Everything. Today we are joined with Cassidy, and Cassidy has a different perspective than what we're used to. So I'm just gonna ask you right off the bat if you can tell us about yourself, what you do, maybe a little bit about where you got to where you are right now, and we'll just let you tell us all the things about meat.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Cassidy Plum, and I work technically for a company out here in Montana, and I do direct to consumer sales in the beef industry. So my background stems from a lot of knowledge in the ag industry, ag commodities. And I have fallen into this direct to consumer marketing when it comes to the beef industry. And so I've really had a lot of fun over the past few months, kind of stepping into the TikTok space and really sharing my knowledge. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that we have educated consumers within the beef industry. I guess my background started from when I was young. I grew up showing cattle. I've always kind of been interested in the cattle industry. I graduated college with a marketing degree with an ag emphasis, and I moved into this ranch marketing space immediately out of college. So it's kind of my first big step, my first big debut of being able to use a platform and talk about what I've been working so hard on for a good, 5, 6 years here. So it's been cool to be able to reach people through social media. It definitely wasn't anything that I had ever anticipated myself being so involved in, and it's been cool to get to connect with people over the past few months on the TikTok space. So
We love TikTok.
yeah.
It's such a positive place to be.
It's a shit
Yeah,
show.
it's definitely interesting to hear people's feedback, but TikTok is really cool because you reach everybody, right? So people will ridicule you for anything that you have to say, regardless of if they have any leg to stand on or not, which is what's quite interesting about that platform specifically, is that you get a lot of people who have a very different background than I do, and it really helps broaden my perspective, I guess. So
So obviously you work in the meat industry. What
yeah.
specifically, to consumer, what is it specific that you focus on?
Yeah. So the company I work for, I do grass-fed beef sales. So that's something that I've kind of learned a lot about over the past few years. I grew up more on the feedlot side of things. And so being able to kind of understand the grass-fed market and understand how that works has been quite interesting. I focus on delivering a quality product, a top-notch product to consumers. And so it's definitely a higher end product that not everybody can get their hands on, but we really focus on making sure consumers understand why it's important to eat clean meat and why it's important to just understand the meat industry, even if you can't afford that top that higher end product, the grass-fed product. So I would say what we focus on is making sure that we deliver the highest quality product, as well as also making sure people understand our story and understand what it really takes to deliver good meat to our consumers. And kind of this whole Montana thing has been super trendy lately, and with Yellowstone, obviously that's made a big difference, right? So people are really interested in getting their hands on this Yellowstone County meat, which is where I'm located. So we're really able to kind of push that, but not only is it a huge selling point when it comes to marketing, but we also believe that in Yellowstone County, we do have very good ranching practices, and we really try and preserve the Western tradition, so to speak, out here. So I'd say a huge piece of this is just educating and making sure when people purchase product through me that they really know what they're getting, right? So transparency is huge.
Now, there are a lot of levels of beef, like the quality in the feed. Can you kind of start us off? Obviously the top tier is basically your grass fed, your grass finished, and it kind of not necessarily that the quality is somewhat, degraded the lower down the spectrum you get, but it's still very nutritious beef. No matter what, it's very nutritious. But what is the the kind of the ranking of how starting at grass fed, grass finished, and then there's the tiers. Can you just go? I think you get what I'm asking.
Yep. No, I hear you. Yeah. So before I get into that, I want to make it super clear that not everybody can afford this grass finished product, right? And so that's something that I've heard a lot in my space and in the ag community is like, we want to push this grass finished product, but not everybody can quite afford it. And it's not reasonable for the majority of consumers. So I don't want to talk down on a grain finished product, but I also do believe in this grass finish that I've been selling over the past year, right? So we'll start exactly what you said. So the product that I sell is a grass finish product, which there's a lot of talk about this. It's quite interesting. So grass finished means that the animal has been fed grass for the entirety of their life, right? So most consumers don't understand that in a cow calf operation, and to be clear, that basically just means that you're raising your own steers is typically what it is, right? You're raising your own cattle in the same facility, in the same area. You're not getting anything into your facility, and you're not really exporting out either. So all these animals that I sell have been within the same pasture basically for the entirety of their life. However, most animals are started on grass. I mean, they start, obviously they drink milk from their mothers, and then they move on to grass. So all cows are fed grass at some point in their life. I think that's important to emphasize. So this grass finished product means that they're weaned from their mom, so they no longer drink milk from their mom, and they're eating grass. And then the end portion, right, that final, like, we'll say 90 days, 3 months about, is what's really crucial. And that's where you see the most differences. Are they getting grass those last 90 days? Or are they going to a feedlot operation where they're going to be finished out on grain? And you see a much different product, even though it's only a short period of time. And that's super important to understand. And there's going to be some variance there with the amount of time that animals are finished. But grass finished basically just means that they are fed grass only. They never are given any corn. They're never given any grain. And then we have kind of, so when I say that 90-day mark, we have some animals that kind of are in the middle there. They're not necessarily a feedlot animal. And this is still a great product, right? They're in the same operation, they're given grain, but they're not necessarily going to a feedlot. And there's been a lot of talk about this, obviously. People really don't like to see the feedlot operations because it can be a little bit rough, right? They're very dense in these pens. They're very, and you see these trucks go down these alleys, and they're dumping corn silage is typically what they're fed, which is fermented corn product that they're putting in these feed troughs. And that's typically what people see, and that's typically what people do not like is seeing these animals packed so densely into these pens in these areas. So that's going to be, your typical grain finished product is that last 90 days, give or take, that they're getting this grain type of feed. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of variance when it comes to that. And so it's important when you see the term grass fed from a marketing perspective, it doesn't really mean much. There isn't a lot of regulation when it comes to that, right? So just because you buy a product that says it's grass fed, it could kind of mean anything. It could still technically mean that it's going to a feedlot, and we're starting to move away from that marketing. However, it's still you see it a lot within the space of people kind of pushing this grass fed, even though all cattle are fed grass at some point in their life. And you can still use that term regardless of if they go to a feedlot or if they're finished on grass for the last 90 days. So
Yeah, I'm like, this is new to me as far as like hearing the term finished. I've heard about grass-fed beef for years, but it wasn't until I got into the carnivore space like almost 6 months ago that I learned of grass finished. Now, like, am I late to the party? Like, how long has this been like a term that's being used?
yeah, no, you're not late. I think it's very new. So for example, my parents run some cattle, and they finish them on grain. So you get a very different product than if we were to get into antibiotics and hormones. These are huge marketing buzzwords, right? Antibiotic free and hormone free. So when you see a smaller operation, that's going to be a grass-fed product, but they're still giving grain. Whereas when you move towards the feedlot space, people are still marketing as grass-fed. So I think it's evolving right now. I think it's changed a lot. And we continue to come up with new marketing terms as people kind of start to catch on. So when the knowledge, I want to make sure that I'm super transparent in my marketing. So when people catch on, that should be a good thing. It shouldn't be hurting my industry. It should be helping, right? So we want to make sure that we're super, super clear on, yeah, grass fed has been used forever. And now people are catching on to where they now want the grass finished product, because that's what matters. Grass fed is just a term that can kind of be thrown around willy-nilly. You don't really need anything to prove that your animal is eating grass, although most of them do at some point in their life. So yeah, I don't think that you're late to the party at all. I think it's interesting to see how we have to kind of shift our marketing on my end when it comes to these new buzzwords and new terms. And I'm sure next week there'll be something different, right? So it's been interesting to kind of watch the industry evolve over time.
Now, so when you go into a standard store, let's just say Walmart, because Walmarts are everywhere, and you don't go to the organic section or whatever, what percentage is, and this might be a variable that you can't really give an estimate on. I buy the very conventional, typical run-of-the-mill beef.
Yeah.
What is the percentage that cow might have spent eating grass versus being, grain finished?
Oh, that's a good question.
Sorry.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so typically what we see is these animals are harvested after about a year, give or take. So to give you an example, we just finished weaning most of the ranches here, which means, taking the calves away from their mothers. So we just finished now. These calves were born. We did branding in June, July, which is pretty typical for this area here, which means we calve a month or two prior. So May calves, I would say. So as soon as they're calved, they stay on their moms until, for a good, May, June, July, August, 7 months until they're weaned. So they are pretty big now that we're weaning them. And then so yeah, I would say it's about 50-50 from when we wean. Sometimes these calves are sold at that point and go straight to a feedlot. There's a lot of variance there. I would say as a percentage, it's about 60 to 70% grass, and then 30% is going to be either on grain or on grass, kind of just depending. And there is so much variance there, just depending on the animal. But what you buy at the store is likely going to be, the last 30% of their life is going to be on grain. So,
okay. Yeah, I have heard that about at least 60% is grass fed.
Yeah.
But that's probably the minimum. But most of the time it's about 70% they'll keep them on grass, and then they'll shift them that last 30. So that kind of confirms what I had learned. But of course, we like to not be dogmatic and keep continuing learning, even though everyone in this space thinks that we're super uneducated about these things.
I do not think that. I've done a lot of research on this, and I don't think that you're uneducated. I think anybody can on social media and comment, unfortunately.
It's more of the people who the naysayers. I think a lot of people think that people, Courtney and I are from the carnivore space, so it's a little bit different than, I know that you kind of have that knowledge of where we're coming from, but I think a lot of people on social media come to carnivore, or maybe even keto people, but mostly carnivore, and they think that we're just following Dr. Paul Saladino because he said it was good and we should do it. But I know that every single person we've talked to who has anything to do with this space has done more research into every aspect of meat consumption that you can really do without going to school for it. And then some of us have even gone to school for it. So I
Yeah.
always like to poke fun at the people who think that we're not smart because they think that we've just followed the masses when I know all of us do our research so heavily. So
Yes, and
Well,
that's something, sorry, I don't mean to
oh,
cut you off.
no, go.
I think it's interesting to see how people can pull these studies and pull, use a doctor to back them up, because there's a doctor that will say anything. There's a study that will back up anything you have to say, right? So all of this should be taken with a grain of salt, because I've gotten into a lot of arguments, obviously, in the social media space about this. And so, yeah, I think what you guys are doing is great. And it's good to just educate people in general, whether it's in the health, about the health side of beef, or it's not. It's just about the studies. So yeah, it's great.
So back to like the cow's life. So if I'm following correctly, now talk about being educated or not. This might be a stupid question. So the calves are born and like at 7 months they're taken and then they're fattened up for the next 3. So like we're eating like just 1-year-old cows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something that's been quite interesting. And typically that's kind of when they get shipped off to, as yearlings is how we refer to them. So they've been alive about a year. By the time they're harvested, it's more than that. It's usually longer, but I would say yearlings are, which is a super easy term to remember, right? Like they're alive for a year, yearlings. So that's typically around the time we decide either to sell off cattle, or we keep them within our operation and finish them. So that's about the time. And so they are a little bit older than a year by the time you eat them. But yeah, I think that that's a really good point to bring up. It's a common misconception that these animals are alive a lot longer than that, and they are full grown at a year. But yeah, that's typically what we see. The product that you buy at the grocery store or wherever you choose to buy beef is going to be, a little over a year that you consume that animal. So
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that. And I guess I didn't ever have an age in my head because it's not like I thought they were 50-year-old cows.
yeah.
Not that I even know how long they live, but yeah, I definitely wasn't thinking that they were like 1 years old.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. And if you ever go to like the county fair, for example, so anybody who's gone, that's where I grew up in that.
That's how
Yeah,
I grew up. Yeah.
really. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm
I
a
grew up
4-H person. 4-H person.
really
Yep.
awesome.
I worked on. I did horse. I was a horse person, but we had some friends that owned a goat farm and a pig farm. So I grew up helping with that, and then everyone I knew had cows and all the things. So
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a good way for people to understand this a little bit better, because it's so accessible, right? You go to your county fair in the summer and you see these animals full size. So that's about the age. I mean, those animals at the county fair go straight. Typically, they'll get fed out a little bit longer, and then they will be harvested after that. It just kind of depends a lot. I mean, at a county fair, you can purchase an animal and have it custom processed through a butcher locally, which I do recommend that to people often, is go to your county fair, purchase an animal from these kids that work really hard to raise them, and you can have them custom processed that way. And those are probably going to be, top tier animals. These kids care so much about what their animals eat. So it's a good education piece for people to go to a local county fair and see, that's exactly what you're going to eat at the grocery store, is that same sized animal. For the most part. So yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of let people understand how old these animals are, because they are full grown. They weigh 1,200 to 1,300 pounds at the county fair. So
Interesting. Oh,
So, I think that you'll be able to get into this as well. The the number one thing that comes up is the environment. I know that I've seen this on your page, so I know that
yeah,
you get this. There is this illusion and narrative going around because of the vegan trends right now, especially coming from like the big food corporations, that somehow a mechanized and lab created food system is much more sustainable and healthy for our environment than cattle farming. And that can include everything from regenerative farming to your conventional beef, because beef is really what gets the heat of it. No one cares about pigs or goat farms or chicken farms for the most
Yeah.
part. It's all the methane that comes from the cattle. And so there is a narrative in the industry right now that, oh my gosh, this is causing so much harm to the environment, and they're, in every way, with the pollution, to the water consumption that it takes for the cattle to be raised. um, can you talk a little bit about statistics with like greenhouse emissions when it comes to cattle farming? Can you
Even like the whole production in general, because I feel like the gas emission from like the farts is super low, but I think people's arguments are just the whole entire production of it in general.
Yeah, no, this is very interesting, and that's a huge selling point on my grass-fed product, is that we do really care about being sustainable. And one thing I really want to emphasize is, I think a big misconception within the cattle industry is people think, hey, you're taking up land that could be used to, say, farm vegetables. That is could not be further from the truth, right? So most of the land that we use to graze our cattle, we're using that because it can't be used for anything else. So if we weren't putting cows on that land, it wouldn't be used for anything. And so we practice the Allen Savory method, so kind of a regenerative ag system. So we're grazing cattle, and it's been shown over time to improve the land and improve the vegetation there. And there's a lot of people that are in that space that understand it a lot better than I do. But I do have some statistics that I kind of want to rattle off. So sorry, I need to look at my notes real quick, but per pound, beef requires less input from surface and groundwater to be produced than many commercial crops like avocados, rice, walnuts, and sugar. So there's a lot of things that cannot be farmed on this land that we're grazing cattle. And it's so interesting for people to kind of have this perspective of like, oh, well, you're wasting land, or you're putting all this carbon into the environment, when in reality it's a small fraction. And I don't have the number off the top of my head. It's a very small fraction that is being used, or that's emitting these greenhouse gases into
it's
the
3.9%.
It's 3.9%. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. I knew it was somewhere in there. I just didn't want to be wrong.
And so just like for perspective, 3.9, just because I'm obsessed, I'm a freak of nature about this stuff. 3.9% is including all livestock, like the whole thing. 2% of that is cattle farming specifically. And I know that people get well, you can't compare emissions. You absolutely can. To put it in perspective, energy production and transportation is almost 56% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Cattle farming is 2% of that.
Yep. 2% is the number that everybody loves to throw around, right? But it's true. And when people hear that, I hear all kinds of debate around this, kind of, oh, like, this isn't true, or how do you know this? And we see it a lot with the fake meat industry. And if you want to get into that a little bit, we see Impossible Foods often push this sustainability message. And the fact of the matter is, we can't get rid of meat. It's not going to happen. And that's been Pat Brown, the founder of Impossible Foods. He's really been pushing this over the years, right? So he wants to completely get rid of meat consumption in the United States, at least. And he's even made strides outside of the United States to eliminate the consumption of meat, because he doesn't think that it's sustainable. And that's just not even a little bit true, right? So it's been interesting to hear the dialogue around this, and what people kind of have for feedback, because Impossible Foods, it's all marketing. And as somebody who works in marketing, I understand that they're trying to push that agenda, but it will never happen. We can never get to that point. So
yeah, I don't want to like criticize or call anybody an elitist. But I have really enjoyed reading some stuff about how the notion that everyone in the world could go meat free and we could get rid of farming as a whole is really just an out of touch elitist mentality, because especially in other countries. Farming and owning livestock is some of the only possession that females specifically will have. And if you take that away from them, they have nothing and they own nothing and they have no rights, because it is through ownership that they do get those rights. And also, there are a lot of areas in Africa, specifically, where the only access to nutrient dense food is livestock, whether it be a chicken or whatever. And
Yeah.
if you take that away from them, they don't have a CVS to go and get, what is it, B12, supplements from, and how they would be severely, severely the most affected people in the world regarding this idea that we should not be in control of animals.
Yeah. Yeah, and it becomes a little bit of an ethical issue, right? So I mean, I'm Catholic, and so meat consumption plays a big role in Lent, for example, something small. And I mean, here in Montana, there's a whole bunch of Catholic people, and that's just it's not even anything in comparison to other religions. Or, I mean, you get into this whole cultural issue where we cannot eliminate meat from our diets. It just doesn't make any sense. Even if, like, I know that you guys push this carnivore, but even besides that, for people who aren't carnivore, it makes a huge difference when you get into cultural issues. And so I don't understand how this will ever get to the point where we just completely eliminate meat from people's diets. It can't happen.
I am also Catholic, so I love to hear about it because I think about
Yeah.
it very much in that sense too. And I think that that's like a good segue, though, is there is, if anything, I think one thing that meat eaters and vegans can agree on is we all want our animals to be treated in a, in revered and respected while they're on and living on the earth. I think that that's something we can all agree on, and I'm sure as someone who works in the industry, you're like, yeah, of course.
Right.
So about the cruel treatment, what are some things that you have seen that you're like, yeah, this is what we're trying to work on and better in the industry, and how, if that is applicable to what you see, what are
Yeah.
some steps being taken so that animals are treated in the best and humane way possible?
Yes, this is a great question because I had a video go, I don't know if I want to say viral, but I had a video get a lot of
Yeah.
attention lately, which is how I think I was found through you guys, which is great. But kind of explaining the process of how I use the term harvesting, because I think that it, helps people to listen and understand.
I will say
And
really quick, not to interrupt you.
no,
I've
you're good.
never heard that word before because when you think of harvesting, you think of like vegetables. And I heard you say it on that video. And then Devin, Maria Emmerich just went, I just saw her post about going and she hunted a deer. And she's like, I harvested a deer for my family. I'm like, oh my God, it's just so interesting because it's just, maybe I'm out of
Yeah.
the loop with the hunting community, but I've never heard of it called harvesting. So
No, yeah, that's great. I think it helps people kind of understand and make this less of an emotional
yeah.
deal, because you have pets, you have dogs in your house, and you take them on as one of your family members. That is not why these animals are born in the first place. They're not born to be pets. They're born to be meat to feed people. And so I think I don't it's hard to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't believe when it comes to ethics. But I think using that term harvested definitely puts it into perspective that just like a crop, just like a vegetable that you eat, we're raising cattle kind of the same way. And we have them on pasture, they're eating grass. We put these inputs into the animals. And then when they're done with their life, the reason that they were even born is to feed humans, right? So it's hard to tell somebody what to believe when it comes to ethics, but I think if we can kind of change the narrative and make sure, to answer your question, Devin, we're doing a whole lot to make sure that process, the kill process, is done in a way that we're proud of, right? So that animal's not suffering. And I wish that more people, I don't think people like to watch it, but I think it is important. That PETA video kind of forced it on everybody. So for background, PETA had a video showing a kill facility. The video was They did a good job. I thought that the video showed it helped us in the beef industry. This animal was killed instantly. There was no suffering, there was no pain. So when you get into this processing, that's typically what we go for, right? And think about when a cow is out in the wild and it gets eaten by a wolf or eaten by a coyote. Is it going to be that quick and painless? No, it's going to get eaten alive likely. So we're really proud in the beef industry of this process of harvesting an animal because there's no suffering. People will sit and argue with what cattle do or do not feel, which is a whole nother topic, right? How much stress are these animals going through? And that's really what it comes down to overall, from when the animal is born to when it's harvested, is how much stress is it going through. And one thing that we do at the ranch I work on is make sure that we're using horses to move cattle, whereas some people use four-wheelers. Not saying that one is worse or better, but there are some studies suggesting that moving cattle with horses, for example, is a little bit of a low stress um, plan. So that's kind of something that we've made an effort to maintain, not only maintain Western traditions, but also making sure that these animals have as little stress as possible and we don't handle them very much, which is also key. We give vaccines when needed, but we don't do anything over the top that would put these animals through more stress than they need to go through. So
But what if, because people are gonna argue, like, but you're the exception. You're not the rule. Is
yeah,
it the rule? Because I've seen there's a very popular dairy farmer on TikTok and Instagram, and
yeah,
he like duets people all the time and is like, these animals are suffering, and he literally shows his he has a very traditional dairy farm, very
yeah,
typical, not what you would consider like an organic, where you're getting your organic, highly sourced milk or dairy products. And these cows are like just lining up to milk themselves, and they'll eat whenever they
yeah.
want, and they come up to him. And is that the norm though? Or are these, I know there's always exceptions. There are people who abuse the system in no in any way. But is the exception that most of these even feedlot cows are kind of, yeah, they might be jammed, packed, and stressed a little bit more, but are they still okay from what we can tell?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point to bring up because I do sell a premium product like I mentioned, so it is kind of a higher price point because we do XYZ. So I would say in the grass-fed industry, we kind of are the exception to the rule because they're mostly free range. It's kind of similar to what you're talking about with this dairy farmer. We are the exception to the rule, and when we see videos of feedlots, I would say that those are going to be extremes also. And so we have to kind of understand that the majority of the beef that you eat is going to be somewhere in the middle. And we can get into even are we able to feed the human population without using feedlots? I would argue that probably not. So I have a different target consumer than a lot of these the feedlot animals, because it is a higher price point and people value, have a different values than people who are buying conventional beef. um, and so yeah, I would say grass fed as a whole is kind of the exception to the rule, and I think the feedlot industry is doing a good job of doing a lot of volume. They're able to produce a lot more. I mean, you can utilize land more efficiently. So another point is that, hey, people who think that the cattle industry is bad for the environment, well, maybe feedlot is the way to go because they're able to produce more in a smaller plot of land, right? And so that's another point that's been brought up quite a bit. So is one better or worse than the other? No, I don't think so, because I mean, when you really look at the inputs and outputs from these facilities, it's hard to even compare. You're comparing apples and oranges, right? So it's quite an interesting conversation when you get into that. What is better, feedlots or grass fed? I don't have an answer to that. I think it's just a different target consumer, and it comes down to your perspective and what you value.
Yeah, one of the most recent conversations and engagements I had with a vegan was, well, we need to first, they weren't understanding that a lot of farmland cannot be used to grow crops. And he's, this, I think it was the man, had argued, we need to get rid of the feedlots, we need to get rid of the livestock farms, and we need to produce crops that can be consumed for humans. Um, And I think that that brings up another thing that I'd like to ask, but a point that I made was, well, you're under this illusion that people are not eating the livestock when that's really, what the majority is. So for you to say that we need to grow crops that people can eat, well, the livestock is being eaten by people. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
kind of a, you're wanting to cancel one out with the notion that only crops can feed people, when actually a large percentage of crops cannot be consumed by humans. I mean, what the statistic I think out there is that 14% of crops grown are actually able to be eaten by humans. And then the other 86% is used between like a variety of like ethanol, things for the environment, like production of like ethanol and, that stuff. And then the other, another percentage is used to give back to the livestock because they can eat the things that we can't. So do you
Correct.
have anything to add on to that as far as like, yeah, don't fall for this false narrative that like, yeah, you might see that only 14% of crops grown in the world can be used for human consumption, but they're not talking about the fact that 86% of those crops, it's not just you're feeding the animals the crops that people can eat, you're feeding them the part that people can't eat.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'll give a very small example of this. So I talked about corn silage earlier. So corn silage isn't just, corn on the cob or corn kernels that humans consume, right? It's the whole plant. So yeah, cattle are able to digest this and they're able to eat a lot of a portion of a plant that humans can't. And so it's a great use of crops, and it's a great use of land when it really comes down to it, because yeah, that statistic is so hard for people to wrap their heads around. Like, yeah, it's just a very small portion of the crops that are grown that are able to be eaten by humans. But yeah, I think I do have a little bit to add, just because, like I say, the corn silage or soybean, for example, there's a lot of portions of a soybean that we don't use, humans don't eat. So yeah, I think it's important to understand, like, these cattle are they're not as efficient as other animals maybe per se, but they are efficient when it comes to giving them, this feed, giving them these portions of a crop that of a plant that we can't eat as humans, and being able to turn that into a nutritious food source for humans to consume. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of this, is just they're able to make use of waste basically.
Yeah, and you have to wonder if we were to take that waste and maybe put it in a huge pile, like just like we do
Yeah.
our garbage, what kind of byproducts would be created in the environment because of that? And I don't know that, like the decomposition, I know some of it, but it's just like in mass copious amounts, what would that do to the world? Because the waste that animals can consume that aren't grass finished, what is it called, carbon
Sequestration.
yeah, that
Yeah.
carbon
Yeah.
carbon what is it, what am I trying to say? You just said it.
Carbon
Carbon.
sequestration.
Yeah, they're able
Yeah.
to filter the whole it's like a complete 360 cycle with the carbon cycling. So,
Yeah.
do
No,
you
it is. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, when it comes to the carbon, it's obviously something that we value quite a bit, and we see an increase in greenhouse gases, obviously, and most of it doesn't even come from cattle. But I think it's an interesting point. Like, what if we didn't have an animal that could consume this waste? What would happen then? No,
Mhm.
it's quite interesting to hear that, and we see a lot of benefits from grazing cattle, and how it improves, the land and soil health, which is kind of the big regenerative ag thing. And I think it should be important to everyone, whether you buy conventional or whether you buy grass fed. It should be important to care about the land and the soil, because we are trying to be sustainable, and make sure that we are raising a product that's going to benefit us in the long run, not just because we're getting a commodity out of it, but because this is land that's valuable and should be used for as long as we can. So yeah, I think it's important to understand kind of this regenerative portion too, and we're putting carbon back into the soil that can be super beneficial. So
Well, I have a bunch of questions, but before I backtrack, the regenerative farming, because yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the ideal way. Getting grass-fed, finished regenerative farming meats are expensive, like you said. Do you ever see that going more like mainstream where the price will then like eventually not be so expensive?
I do. Yeah, that is very interesting to kind of predict what the market will do. I think it's eventually going to, well, first of all, I think there's going to be some laws that are going to be set in place when it comes to this, and we're already seeing this happen, right? So California has obviously made quite a few changes recently in their legislation about this specifically. I think it's going to be not only the norm, it's going to be necessary, and people are going to require it legally, which is a whole nother issue. Whether or not this should be implemented is one thing, but I do think overall it will become the norm. Whether or not it is in legislation, I don't know. I think it has to be, and I think it's really important for consumers to understand that when they buy a product, it's going to directly affect. You wouldn't necessarily make that correlation, right, between, buying beef and is this going to help my grandchildren live in a better place. But that's really what it comes down to, right? You have to think about, hey, when I buy my beef, if I have the money to maybe buy something more expensive, how is that going to impact generations to come, and how is that going to impact the planet? And I think it's important to just put that in people's heads. Hey, when I go to the store and buy a product, it's going to directly affect, the environment and the land that we live on. So I think to answer your question in short, I do think it will eventually move more mainstream to where the price will not be expensive, whether it's required or not. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, I mean, because it is expensive, but I think it's a good thing, even if you can't afford it all the time, maybe just once in a while, just kind of like as a way to like vote with your wallet, essentially. Like, okay, you can't buy it every time, but if we all do it a little bit, maybe that will make a difference, or maybe it will just, I don't know, bring more awareness on it. Um, but okay, so I do have a couple other questions, if that's okay, if we backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, so okay. So back to the harvesting, which I think is so much nicer of a word. I feel like when you say slaughter, it just you picture like torture and mess. At least I do.
That's their argument though. Like if you don't like the word slaughter, then you shouldn't be killing animals. So that's like why that's a narrative. That's like why it's part of the, because if you don't like the way it sounds, don't kill animals, you know?
Well,
Huh.
it makes it seem like it's being done in a gnarly way, but I'm looking at the video that you shared that went
Yeah.
huge. And it's like, I don't remember what you said, if it's a zap or whatever it is, just right here on your forehead, and they're down. Like, and like you said before, way more peaceful than being mauled to death, out in the fields. So yeah, can you touch a little bit like on what is happening in the harvesting process? Like, what are they doing with that little forehead thing?
And then
Yeah. Yeah.
is that standard? Like, is that what is protocol? Just like discuss that too, because I was going to go back to that too, Courtney.
Oh, great. No, this is like probably one of my favorite parts about the meat industry, because there's just not a lot of educated people. You go to the store and buy beef, or you think it's really sad, this big emotional ordeal, and it's not. So to answer your question about this, is a bolt gun is what they use. So we have this process down so well. I mean, and in my video I discuss, hey, the US at USDA inspected plants, which is the majority of meat that you buy, right? I mean, for us to ship out of the state of Montana, we have to be using a USDA inspected facility, which means there is a USDA employee on site at all times. You cannot be harvesting animals at all without a USDA inspector there, making sure that you're, kosher, everything's good. So we use a bolt gun is what it is, and it sends a bolt in the forehead. I misspoke in one of my videos saying that it was the temple. It's not the temple, it's the middle of the forehead here. Obviously I had people
I
correcting me, and
saw the comments.
they love
Well, you know what? But that's also, I mean, this is a different topic. It's also good to make mistakes because then people will correct you and give your post more engagement and push it out. So,
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I think it probably did help. Yeah. So the middle of the forehead, we put a bolt gun is what it is, and it's not very loud. It's definitely less loud, I would say, than a gun, a rifle. which is also used as a backup method typically, but the bolt gun goes in the middle of the forehead and it basically launches this bolt into the brain of the animal and it instantly knocks them unconscious. So there's about, I think that typically you have to, as soon as that animal is killed, it needs to be hung within 3 minutes, which I know that sounds kind of gruesome, but it just puts in perspective how quick that turnaround time is. I mean, when I go to a processing facility, the bolt gun basically goes off and in 3 minutes the hide's off. Like, it's quick. That sounds really gruesome, I know, but it's important for people to understand like how quick this turnaround time is. Like, you go from a live animal to a product that people can consume within 3 minutes. And so I think that's important to understand. And blood tests are being done at USDA inspected facilities to test for diseases and make sure that this product that you're consuming is in fact healthy, and that we take a lot of pride in this kill process because it's pretty seamless, and it does make a huge difference on our industry for people to understand how quick and efficient it is. It's not an emotional thing. It's just a very, you get it over with. The animal has served its purpose. As I said in my video, it's been over a year. This animal's been alive. It's been fed. I mean, for me, it's a very kind of humbling process. And I talked about kind of being Catholic, but being able to see, hey, we're super efficient, and these animals are just for food. That's what they are. They're raised for food. They're not pets. And so it's been pretty cool to kind of just watch that. And it is a little bit sad. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a little bit sad to see a cow be killed. I have a little bit of a heart, and vegans love to tell me that I'm just a pig that that doesn't have any emotions. That's not the case. We do care for our livestock, and we want to make sure that this kill process is super seamless. And so I think it's really good for consumers to understand that portion of this as well.
Yeah, that they're not suffering. Okay, so it's actual, like,
Yeah.
because you said a bolt, and so like a bolt is being shot through.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting,
So
but
what happens is there any situations where that is like a first line has not worked?
It very rarely does that happen, and when it does, typically you send it. I would say the only thing that would ever happen is maybe you see. So we test for if a pupil is reactive to know before. Again, this is a little bit gruesome, but I think it's still important. We try and see if the pupil's reactive. That's how we know that we can move forward within the processing. And so every once in a while there'll be a reactive pupil, and we have to either, it doesn't ever happen hardly, but you either have to use a rifle as a backup method, and that happens sometimes when an animal is too large or just can't keep its head still as much as we'd like, because the animal has to be perfectly still. We talk about high stress situations. I kind of disagree with that. This animal's been through a squeeze chute essentially, so it's a metal panels on each side. It's been in the squeeze chute 5 or 6 times usually prior. It doesn't know that it's about to be killed. It has no idea. Cattle do not think that they have a purpose in society. I've seen a lot of comments about that. They don't. And that's a whole nother ethical argument, right? Do these animals think that they deserve to serve a purpose in society? I would argue that that's not the case, but typically as a backup method, we use another bolt, or we have to use a rifle as a second method, unfortunately. But it rarely happens, and when it does, an entire plant will be shut down for at least a week, typically, to look at the bolt gun and to look at if it's a rifle that failed, to look at that as well. And we talked a little bit earlier about other methods. If this is the exception to the rule, in this case, no, this is 100%. I would say almost every kill facility operates with a bolt gun. It's the most efficient. You do see some instances where there's custom harvest, so a butcher will, or a processor will come out to your facility and harvest your animal with, say, a rifle, but it's a very similar process to what we see on a kill floor. It's just using a rifle instead of a bolt gun.
yeah, I was wondering that because when I used to visit my grandparents in Utah, my grandpa worked at a slaughterhouse for a little bit, and he took me in to like show me around, but like very small. I mean, it was probably like him and someone else, I would assume, super small. So yeah, I'm assuming that wouldn't have been like regulated. Like, it's people that have been like hunting, I think, like bring their animal to him or something. I don't know. Then it would be alive. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, that didn't make sense. So, okay, then what the hell was he doing what would his slaughterhouse be then?
No, you can do that. No, yeah, you're right. So there are a lot of facilities that you can bring your animals that are already killed. So you just bring the carcass in.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry, that sounds gruesome too. I need to be better with my word choice. It's all about word choice here, like
Okay, so
harvested, slaughtered.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
You
that
bring,
could have happened too. Or if people
yeah.
are having their own cows, then I guess they would have brought them to that.
Yeah, and so we also see mobile kill trailers, which is very efficient, and it's picked up a lot of speed over the past few years. Basically, it's this big trailer, and you harvest the animal. Kind of what I was saying, you drive out to a pasture and you do the whole thing. You kill them there, and then you are able to put the animal into this kill trailer, which is really cool. And so it's a refrigerated trailer that you can hang the animal inside and transport it then to a processor, which is probably what you're talking about. Is you get the carcass. It has to be fast, don't get me wrong, it does have to be quick, to be approved and inspected by the USDA, but it does happen. We are seeing kind of a trend with these mobile kill trailers, and it's a very efficient process, I'd say.
So at like where you guys are when you're harvesting the animals, is everything being done there, like made into ribeyes and packaged and shipped off?
Yeah, yeah. So we bring our live animals on a Tuesday night, the next morning, so they don't sit for more than, not even 12 hours typically, at this facility. They're then run through a squeeze chute. So this, like I say, these panels kind of on the side, they have a head catch. So the animal's head is in these two panels, and that's how we harvest them. And then the side of the panel actually turns, and that's how we hang, like I said, in 3 minutes typically you see that animal go from live to product basically. And then from there we do a dry aged product, so it's typically a 14-day dry age. They sit in the cooler, and then the next, after that 14 days are up, they come and bring these animals out, and and I have a video of this kind of on my TikTok too. You can kind of see the animal that's hung, and then you transport it and process it right there. It goes into ribeyes to ground beef to everything. But we do have typically a 14-day dry age, and it's all done in the exact same facility. Typically, it helps a lot with the USDA inspection to have everything done in the same building, and it doesn't have to be a big building, but it does help to have everything done right there in the same facility.
Interesting. Why the 3 days? I mean, the 3 minutes. What would happen? Like, does
Mhm.
it get rotten all of a sudden? Like, why the 3 minutes?
Rigor mortis is what we
Oh,
look
okay.
for. Yeah, yeah.
So
So
it would be
it
rotten,
is
I guess. It
rigorous.
wouldn't taste good, huh?
Yeah, it would be gross. And we talk a little bit about, like, if the animal is stressed, typically you don't have as good of a product. So we don't want our animals to be stressed when they go through the squeeze chute, and they're not. They've done it a million times. They don't know. There's a lot of evidence that suggests these animals they don't see their friend being killed and then think that they're gonna get no. It doesn't quite work like that. I hear this a lot with vegans, that for some reason want to think that cattle have the same mental capacity that humans do, and they just don't. Um, I get ridiculed a lot for that, saying that I'm a horrible person, that I don't understand that cows can think like humans, but they don't. They don't understand. They're not stressed when they go through, and it does affect the meat quality. If they are overly stressed, it gives us a kind of a gamey taste, and we don't want that.
Okay, well, now I have a few more questions. Now, the
Yeah.
gamey taste, I thought that had to do with it being grass or what they fed, because my understanding is like I also get meat from Costco, which I think is really delicious, but I will also buy the grass fed, grass finished occasionally, and sometimes it does have like a gamier flavor. Is that like common, or is that just like random depending on the cow?
Yeah, I think it does have a little bit to do with diet. Diet isn't everything with that. I do think a lot of times it is a stress thing. So you were talking earlier about, like, people killing a deer or an elk in the field, and we hear about this gamey taste most often there, because of the stress. So if, say, you wound an animal if you're out hunting, you wound an animal and then it's stressed and it's, it's suffering a little bit, and you kill it, you end up killing it. That animal's not going to taste as good because it had a lot of adrenaline going through its body before it was killed. So it does make a big difference. With that, and I think that diet has something to do with it, but it's definitely not everything. I have noticed with the grass fed, you get a different taste. I don't think it's necessarily the same as being gamey. It's just, a little bit unique, more robust is what people like to refer to it as. So
Interesting. Okay, and
yeah.
one last question about this, and then sorry, Devin. Um, okay, I I have people like mention to me a lot, like as much as I eat, I should buy like a cow or half a cow or whatever. And I mean a dead one, like not have one in my backyard. But my concern would be, I mean, because I feel like once in a while you have like a steak or whatever, and you're like, it was just like a little off, or you didn't love it. What if you're then like you buy half a cow and you're stuck with like a wonky cow? Like, do you guys sell like half cows, or do you know anything about that? Like, can I get a refund?
You want to no, that's funny. The company that I sell for, we do individual cuts. That's an interesting point that I hadn't thought much about, honestly, is yeah, what do you do if you don't like this animal and you have, half a beef in your freezer that you now have to eat because and it didn't turn out well. That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't put much thought into that. And I guess that's a benefit of buying by the cut, right? However, it is way more cost efficient to buy half of an animal. I think the biggest thing, it is a risk, is to find a butcher or a processor that you really like in your area, because that makes or breaks the product. We talk about the kill process. If you're using a USDA inspected facility, that's typically going to be better, just because they have to follow more protocol. So I would say you really do have to kind of just take that leap and take that risk and make sure you're using a butcher, a processor that does a really good job, and you're not going to have any risk of, this gamey taste that we talk about, because that is a big risk to take, to buy that much meat and then have a product you don't like.
Yeah, or even just like it being maybe a little tough. Like I get ribeyes from Costco a lot, and last week we got some, and I'm like, they were just they weren't as good as they normally are. It's like, what if we had a whole freaking cow of this? Like,
That happened to my parents.
really?
Yeah, they bought like a quarter or half of some sort of Angus like cow, and my dad did not like it, so he would not eat it, which is crazy because we have had fresh meat, because the 4-H and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, no, it does happen. It does happen. It's very unfortunate. We've had that too, because I obviously grew up raising livestock. So I showed cattle, my brother showed pigs, I also showed lamb, and my parents would never have lamb in the freezer. A lot of people don't like it. But yeah, we've definitely had hogs, had pigs that they just didn't turn out well. And so it comes down to the butcher, and I'd say even travel a little if you can, because in my area, I come from a town of like 300,000 people, and we have only a couple butchers that we really trust. And you really have to do your research and just ask around and find out who does a really good job. I'm lucky enough to work with a processor here local that does a phenomenal job. But you have to be really careful. And when you're selling direct to consumer, the processor is everything. I keep emphasizing that, and I can't emphasize it enough. It can make or break. And when you get into sausage, when you get into ground product, you have to make sure you trust, the butcher. So
Okay, I didn't. That would come into play as much, the butchering part, as then
yeah,
how the cow's living and eating.
yeah, no, I think that's only a very small portion of it. I think it has to do a lot with the kill process and a lot with the butcher.
Interesting. Okay. How long have you been posting all this on TikTok?
Not long. I started, I think, in July. So I mean, TikTok hasn't been around very often, but yeah, I haven't been posting very long. And honestly, it just brings me a lot of joy to feel like I can help people and hopefully educate consumers, because whether you buy grass-fed, buy my product, or don't, as a whole, working in the industry, we just want everybody to know exactly where their meat is coming from. And I think that applies to all industries, but specifically
Yeah,
the beef industry.
yeah, it's great. I think it's really interesting. I'll be excited to follow. I bet I feel like you're gonna blow up because the amount of attention my posts get when it's just a steak, they're gonna lose their mind seeing the whole process of it. Like I feel like that's gonna be way more interesting than how I'm cooking the beef. You're showing the whole like behind the scenes of the beef. The
Look
beef.
at
I
that.
think it's fascinating.
Look at the dairy
Yeah,
farmer
thank
who's
you.
blown up with like
I've seen
1.5 on TikTok. He's
Yeah,
like,
I've seen some of his stuff. Do you remember
Yeah.
his name? I don't even know if I follow him, but I've
I'll
seen
send
something.
I'll send him over on Instagram whenever I come across him. I try not to scroll too much on TikTok. I hate because I don't like it. Um, but yeah, I do foresee that happening. I think too. I think you're gonna have a good amount of. I think you're gonna have a good audience.
Yeah, 'cause I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting too.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think a lot of it comes down to what my intention is behind the videos, right? And so I'm not trying to post necessarily to have a whole bunch of followers, but the more people that follow me, the better, because I really want this message to get out, how important it is to just support the industry and to, even if you don't eat meat, like having vegans on my page, I think is helpful. And I've had a lot of vegans and vegetarians comment on my videos saying, hey, I don't eat meat, but I really like what you're doing, and I really appreciate you being super transparent and showing what happens in the beef industry. Or vegans saying, hey, I support this kill process. I think it's extremely ethical, because it is. And so yeah, I think the intent behind these TikToks is what's huge. And who knows, maybe there'll be another platform in 4 or 5 months. You never know. But for now, TikTok's been great to reach people for sure.
yeah, the organic reach is still like it's so great. But no, I'm excited because I feel like you being on there is like added backup and support for me just to like help educate these people. Like anybody else that's sharing information on why we are not horrible human beings for eating a cow, like I'm all about. So I'm excited to see more of what you share and how you go about like the whole behind the scenes and yeah, like your word transparency, like that's 100% it. So yay,
Yeah.
good for you. I'm excited for you.
Yeah,
And I,
yeah, me too. It's been great.
and I think a testament to um the quality and of work is how transparent a business is. If you don't want someone coming into your facility and seeing the behind the scenes, it probably means that you're not proud of the work being done. And so it's really great to see someone who is proud, who is showing. And it sounds like that's the majority of this beef industry. Like, yeah, hey, we're super proud of this. Like, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
And that I think is a testament to the work and the ethicalness of the industry as a whole and how there isn't a lot of suffering because that's not what you guys want.
right. Yeah. No, that's huge. And there is always, I mean, the cattle industry is always going to kind of be under a microscope. I think, because we start to talk about, the feedlot industry, and people really don't like that. And I think within the feedlot industry, even it's important to be transparent there also, and just make sure that people are really seeing the full picture, because whether you support it or don't support it, at least then right? You know what the facts are. You're not just listening to someone on TikTok who's never been in the industry, who can't speak on this. And that's what's been so great about social media, is you get perspectives of people from all over the country who have maybe seen this and actually know that what they're talking about, instead of just these PETA people, for example, posting videos and knowing nothing about the entire process.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I haven't seen, do you mention the company you work for at all, or do you have to keep that private?
Yeah, as of now, I'm going to keep it private. I've thought about it quite a bit. If in the future I can kind of leverage the company that I work for, and I think it's coming. It's something, I mean, it's a big responsibility to take that on, right? Because I do work for a pretty big company, and I don't want to necessarily, I mean, that goes into my entire personal brand is representing a company. And so it is a little bit tricky. It's something that is probably coming. I just need to make sure I'm always on my best behavior if that were to be the case, because I would basically be a spokesperson for this company. So not yet, but I think in the future, it's something that I would like to leverage. So
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, do you have any questions, or are you
No,
good?
I was gonna say, do you have anything else? I mean, I could talk all day. I'll probably be in your DMs later, but
Yes, please
great,
do.
like part two. I'm sure we'll reach out to, like, I think we have intentions to probably cycle through people again just to
Yeah.
squeeze out more. But for now, where can people find you? Where are you the most active? And so we'll tag you and where they can find you at.
Yeah, so everything's pretty simple. I'm on Instagram and TikTok right now. I try and stay away from Twitter because it's hard. It's hard to be on Twitter. But on Instagram, it's just my name, Cassidy Plum, no spaces, no underscores. And then same with TikTok, it's just my name. So I try and keep it simple. I don't think I'm on any other platform.
You should
try
get
and
on
find me on
YouTube.
Facebook.
You should
What's
get on.
that?
You should get on YouTube.
I should get on YouTube. That's a good
and
point.
Facebook. We'll have a little chat after we end this.
Yeah, that'd be good. I think that YouTube would probably be good. I've seen a lot of people do really well in that space. I have a lot of words to say, obviously, so these 15-second TikTok videos are tough. So I think YouTube would probably be a better platform to hop on to eventually. Yeah.
Okay, well, we will link you in the description box, but thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.